Hey, Justin with Coughy Talk. I got Danny Victor here with me from Gulfstream Gardens. Danny, you're an attorney.
That's right, I'm
That was your profession before the
right.
gracious law passed that gave us all so much bounty. Recently, speaking of laws, there was a couple of bills that for 2 or 3 years didn't have any legs, and then somehow they're floated through the governor's desk. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, like your history with the Medical Marijuana Act?
Sure. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm a fan of the show, so I appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
I will give an introduction about myself, but first let me just say that to answer your question, I think the reason why those bills made it to the governor's desk is because the recreational effort failed, and as a result of the fact that the legislature was working on this when they saw that there wasn't going to be anything else on the ballot, they just said, okay, we'll advance this forward, because they wouldn't have known what to do, I think, if recreational was on the ballot and could have passed. So as much
as things are to paraphrase, they're spinning out of control slightly. Law enforcement, a lot of people don't know where they belong in all of this.
Right, so as upset as I am that rec failed, it did give us this set of regulations, which I think is a great step forward for the state, and I'll tell you why. As an attorney and a member of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Task Force since 2010, and someone who's been a grower as a caregiver and a patient, and a lawyer who's a grower and a grower who's a lawyer, I've really had good access and insight into law enforcement officials and legislators and patient right advocates.
No doubt, yeah.
It's been an interesting process to now be at the position where the same people, meaning the law enforcement community who is responsible for protecting the public from the law of prohibition, is now responsible for protecting the public's safety with regard to the law of regulation. And,
right, which is kind of the polar opposite in many ways.
It isn't, but it's a real opportunity for local communities because of the ordinance structure of the 5-tier licensing system, which we'll talk about in a second.
Sure.
It gives local communities an opportunity to adopt ordinances that speak to the actual law enforcement needs that they experience, whether it be
interesting.
Whether it be a demand for security, or perhaps we know some communities in Michigan have long stretches of wide open highway, and
yeah. So we know that a large concern in the law enforcement community with the legalization of marijuana was that's a large gap in their budget now. There's a lot of guys who might have lost their jobs or been otherwise put out of work to some degree, if not totally.
Yeah.
This is a great way for these municipal police forces to recapture some of that capital without having to resort to controversial means.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity for law enforcement leadership to step up and say, this is a real opportunity to not only employ the people that we care about in our community, law enforcement, frontline people, first responders, frontline people.
Sure, yeah, no doubt.
If we have an opportunity to help increase their standard of living, their children's standards of living, this is an industry that, by virtue of the fact that secure transportation is needed and very specific security guidelines are required at grow operations and processing centers, this is a real opportunity for law enforcement officials either entering into retirement who may still want to continue working in the capacity of a peacekeeper, or someone within the ranks of a sheriff's department who wants to say, I'm willing to learn how to best educate these individuals who are willing to offer their service. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for companies to come into Michigan and give us that help to make sure that, like you were saying, the money that starts coming in from the regulation of cannabis can be not diverted away from law enforcement, but diverted to other priorities within law enforcement.
Yeah, transformed.
Which, ironically, in this case, just happens to be protecting marijuana. But the reality is, work is work.
Well, at the end of the day, before legalization happened, the types of cats out there that were involved with large-scale criminal enterprising of marijuana and other drugs, at the end of the day, when you consider those cats, and then you consider these guys that they're protecting us from during, let's say a municipality says we want the police force to be the active security force involved in our grow operations here, our manufacturing operations. Okay, you're still protecting me from the same type of guy.
I'm going to go one further and tell you that my bet is that more people would start applying to work as officers.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because you don't feel like you're selling your morality or your values upriver.
Yeah. Well, once people who would be good at that job know that they have an opportunity to protect their community and simultaneously not have to criminally prosecute their friends and family,
or a kid or somebody else,
or anyone with regard to anything marijuana, you're going to get a lot of people who say, you know what, that actually might be a good job for me, because that I can do. I can get behind it.
Yeah, I got a friend who's a cop, and he was where he patrols is up north, and he was concerned about it troubled him, like, we're under orders to make sure that you are following the law to the letter,
Mm-hmm.
And he's all like, what if it's a kid?
Mm-hmm.
What if it's the child who's the patient? He doesn't want to have to be put in a situation that compromises his morality, because that's the last thing he wants to do, is take away medicine or criminalize somebody's parents because of a technical rule violation or something. This provides law enforcement a great opportunity to take the mantle of leadership here.
Yeah, and it's really going to be up to the municipalities. The way that the law is written and will be adopted, it indicates that the home rule governs. So there are over 1,700 municipalities, so cities, villages, townships in the state of Michigan. Each one of them will have the opportunity to enact an ordinance which allows 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or all 5 of the 5 license tiers that are available: growing, processing, secure transportation,
Sure.
lab testing, and provisioning. And so because of that fact, there's going to be a bottleneck for patients, in my opinion, unless each of those municipalities adopts its own secure transportation aspect of the ordinance. They have to have, I would say, at least
because how
one.
are you going to move it after
That's right.
things get
So
rolling?
growers can only sell to secure transporters. Processors can get from secure transporters. A secure transporter is needed to take the medicine
Even to move it from one
to
place
the lab.
to another. Yeah.
we need to have it tested. The test results are going to get filed with the state system. So everything that the state can do, that counties can do, that municipalities can do to make sure that there are an ample number of secure transportation licenses available will be the number one goal of anyone who wants to be a part of the diversion objective to keep medicine out of the hands of non-patients.
So what you're saying, essentially, is that, let's say the powers that be, there's elements out there that are just generally opposed to marijuana in any form. And some of those guys could capitalize on this type of language to say, hey, sure, we'll grant you all the licenses you want, except transport. So now, in a way, these guys are, for lack of a better term, landlocked.
Yeah,
they
so
could try to bring in somebody else,
Yeah.
but then it raises a question about, are you allowed to operate here because we have our rules here?
So firstly, I would say that that person needs to be intensely looked into. That person is probably either endorsed by or enticed by black market cannabis commerce. Anyone who would oppose the safe transportation of legal medicine is by default in favor of the black market, which continues to move that medicine from point A to point B. So I would first say that person's credibility is highly suspect, and their motivation is probably
Just logistically
nefarious.
speaking, yeah.
Right. Having said that, if their goal is to throw a wrench in the cog and try to interrupt the market, the reality is that cities won't put up with that, because
They
people
won't.
won't put up with
They
that.
won't. If you look at Gaylord, I mean, the prosecutor there, he was doing this. He was throwing every wrench he had, and he's 86. They're done. They voted him out.
Right.
So.
So people that care about their jobs, and if their jobs are being elected, then they need to do what their communities say. But that doesn't mean that some part of the state, and I'm a firm believer of this, should really push agricultural licenses. Agricultural licenses for cannabis is for cannabis grown outdoors, because cannabis can only be grown as medicine indoors or outdoors in zones that are agricultural or industrial. Now, the law does state that there's room to grow in areas of municipalities that are unzoned. And
Sure, but that's just a simple matter of zoning it as industrial.
it's
or
also an
agricultural.
opportunity for an entrepreneur in an agricultural area, let's say, to find an unzoned piece of land and offer the community.
Well, not to mention all the
a solution.
opportunities for places like Detroit and Flint and Lansing that are post-industrial.
Right.
You know, there's still all these industrial zones with all these empty buildings and power
Those would
to
be
the buildings.
those would be great places for processing. Those would be great places for packaging. I bet we'll see marketing firms pop up near the Cass Corridor part of Detroit. Companies that specialize in marketing cannabis products to cannabis consumers. And but I do want to go back, and it's not that I disagree with you. It's just focusing on the aspect of Michigan's real agricultural history and the ability for people who are my age and maybe a little bit older than me to look and see that their kids are going to have an opportunity that's a little different than the opportunities that I had and that my siblings had and that my friends had growing up in Michigan, which is a Midwestern place. When I was younger, the question was, would I stay? Would I go away to professional school and come back? Would I just go to college locally and not even think about moving? Would my parents be around their grandkids?
As a parent, I want to be around my
Right,
kids
this is
as
what
well.
people think about. I think in Michigan, where you have a very strong history of family and a very strong history of local community and a very, very firm connection to the earth as farmers and growers, you know, this is an opportunity for people in agricultural zoned areas to say to their neighbors, this is an opportunity for us to put a retirement plan together that also employs our children, because this is an industry that will put those people's children through college. It will put them through graduate school, and if we can give them an industry that supports their passion and their pocketbook, we can get them to stay here and continue to build our infrastructure, not with people who are just coming here to capitalize on the industry,
cash in, right.
but people who really have ties here that want to make sure that
things like Michigan's history.
That the next generation is cared for.
No, I agree 100%. And that's well said, man. Well said. So one of the other things that we were talking about in regard to 4209 was we've covered the law enforcement aspect of it.
Yep.
Okay, and what are the other tiers?
So
and what do you see? You know, what's in store for us? What does the patient have to look?
So my suspicion is that for most patients who live in a town where they are within 15 minutes from a dispensary, they have reasonable access to their meds, that will remain mostly as is. I would say that those communities that have, and I'm speaking of Flint and Lansing and Ann Arbor, that have regulations among them that people abide by, I think the community will just want to keep those. So the ability for people who are in the industry to continue to operate and thereby providing an uninterrupted supply of medicine for patients, that will probably just keep on as usual. For people who either aren't involved in the industry yet or would be interested in getting involved in aspects of the industry that are now new to it, like software development for seed-to-sale tracking, secure transportation, training facilities for people who will be the secure transporters, the law that the state, regardless of what the municipalities say, the state's licensing structure is such that in order to receive a secure transportation license, you need to have 2 people working in the vehicle at all times, one of whom remains in the vehicle. It's very much like transporting cash or alcohol. It's regulated with security in mind, and so that job does exist, but not in this industry. So, you know, I see an opportunity for employment training. I see an opportunity for employment agencies who place people to really reach out to folks and say, look at these 5 tiers. Do any of these interest you? I mean, it really gives job placement personnel an opportunity to target people with a passion for the industry and a spot within it and say, I can find you a job.
So as a patient, I mean, is this going to, you hear a lot of, as a patient, social media, various other enterprises, you see things like people are concerned with the quality of the stuff that they're getting from their caregivers. They're concerned about it being clean. Is there any sort of testing mandated under this law?
Yep, there's...
and what types of facilities, I mean, are allowed?
So there's, under this law, safety compliance facilities, which is what they're called, safety compliance facilities, have to be accredited by the state by virtue of the lab's certification, either by being trained in the field of cannabis potency testing or having previously served as a state-accredited laboratory for other work. So people who are in the business will be able to stay in the business and expand into this field,
As well as others who aren't.
can come in and say that they're accredited to work with cannabis. And then they have to have one certified lab technician on site and performing the experiments and keeping track of all the data, which then gets reported to the state in connection with the statewide mandatory regulation agency that has yet to be formed. But we'll set up rules for things like when those results have to be provided, how much of each sample per batch needs to be tested in order to yield a verifiable result for that batch. And so to answer your question about how much reliance will patients have on purity and reliability of providers, we don't know yet. No one does, because the market isn't there yet. But the hope is that the state will take this aspect of licensing very seriously and allow the labs to grow and educate the state, and then the state can change its parameters, because this is so brand new. It's the first time in 100 years that modern science and technology is being applied to the cannabis industry. And so when you heap 100 years of progress onto something, it's going to take some time for those technicians and those professionals and experts in those fields to apply what has been learned in the past century to make sure that it's being done as well as it can right now. With 100 years head start, it'd be a different story.
No doubt.
So in terms of
these issues would already be handled out.
Labs need to be given room to error, which is what lab techs do, in order to learn what to do next.
Yeah, it's a developing field,
right,
for sure.
So that's what I would say. I'd be, for any city ordinance for any city that wants to adopt an ordinance for a lab, I would say you're going to get, a guaranteed six new hires. You're going to need front desk personnel, back of the office personnel, computer technician. I mean, this just speaks to the number of
and some
trained
sort of qualified
jobs.
scientists as well.
These are well-paying jobs, and they, would probably be served by someone with an associate's degree. So it's not something that you need a lot of expensive education for.
Yeah, typically in these laboratory settings, the oversight is by the PhD.
That's right.
And then he has several, associates or bachelor's candidates.
Yeah, and they're not going to be huge laboratories. They'll be small.
I think that's a good thing, don't you?
It's great. They'll be small. There'll be small places where people who understand the science best can work with the other people in the area who also do, and sooner or later a big company will probably buy them. Or
it's exciting. We're all learning about cannabis at the same time together now.
Right. Even the opponents of cannabis legalization and medical cannabis legalization,
they're on the wagon, brother.
The strongest voices against Michigan's law didn't even have a problem with medical marijuana
itself. That as a thing.
The issue was how to curtail money laundering, which is a patent acknowledgement that the industry and commerce and market structure are already there. So how you get rid of money laundering is you make that taxable.
Sure.
So I would say to anyone who opposes any form of legalizing anything that's prohibited,
just doesn't want to pay taxes.
Well, right. So, but when those taxes start going to pay for teachers,
education, and
healthcare,
and fixing our roads,
and bridges, schools,
yeah,
food for people who don't have it, jobs for people who don't have them, training for people who would really benefit from it. I've always been a firm believer that no one loses when it comes to the repeal of cannabis prohibition.
Yeah, that's a good sentiment.
If you're a fan of democracy, if you're a fan of capitalism, if you're a fan of the American dream, then you have to be in favor of the repeal of prohibition, because it's a classic tale of the populace exercising their freedoms and liberties after figuring out, by virtue of this democratic process, that a mistake had been made. And only democracy really has the ability to say, we made a mistake, and guess what, there's another generation of people who learn from it, and they're not going to let that same mistake happen. I mean, so it's like, anyone who really, really, truly cares about democracy can't, help but sit in awe of just how amazing it is that it's democracy itself that made the repeal of prohibition possible.
Yeah.
So, anybody who's interested in politics or political philosophy might, and still possibly be opposed to the repeal of cannabis prohibition, might want to, think about their actual philosophical beliefs.
Yeah,
because
it's 'cause
they
they
really
seem
do
kind of
support
opposed to
it.
each
They
other,
really
yeah.
do support it.
Well, it was great having you here, man. You're a gentleman and a
Thanks.
scholar.
Well, I appreciate it very much.
And
Love the
we're
show.
looking forward to having you back.
Thank you.
I'm sure this bill is going to continue to develop, and we'd like to have you keep us informed on what to expect.
My pleasure anytime.
All right. See you guys.